The joys of off-road driving and mastering a four-wheel drive vehicle are being discovered by more and more people, too. So this review of 10 years of the Camel Trophy will be combined with 10 off-road driving lessons, a Range Rover Vogue Automatic, a Land Rover 110 Turbo Diesel, and a Camel Trophy veteran that survived the 1988 Sulawesi adventure are our partners. First, some basic rules for off-road driving. Engage the low-range gear and lock the central differential before you drive in difficult terrain. Always use the pedals extremely sensitively, avoiding abrupt movements. Brake only when absolutely necessary. Use the clutch only when stopping or changing gear, not forgetting to take your foot completely away from the clutch pedal again, so that you don't depress it inadvertently when the going gets rough, and then lose control of the vehicle. Hold the steering wheel in both hands, but don't put your thumbs inside, or driving over a pothole could be very painful. Above all, take to heart the most important rule of off-road driving. Drive as slowly as possible, as fast as necessary. The Camel Trophy is awarded to the best driver, not the fastest. In the extremely difficult conditions which are a part of this event, the speed rule has proved itself over and over again. As slowly as possible, as fast as necessary. If you should ever find yourself in the position of having to drive through a wood or heavy undergrowth where there is no road, it's always worth taking the trouble to check out the terrain beforehand, to find the route which will do least damage to vehicle and nature. Stop and explore on foot. Determine your exact route. Pay especial attention to the nature of the ground beneath the undergrowth, so when driving through you avoid deep holes, bogs, and other obstacles. Select the gear which is most appropriate for the type of ground and its inclination, and drive as slowly and as smoothly as possible into the critical area. Follow your chosen route as closely as you can, taking care to steer clear of tree roots and large stones. If you're forced to drive over small trees or bushes, do so at the same very low speed. This minimizes damage to both vehicle and nature. Especially important, if you have to drive over an obstacle and you're driving a Land or a Range Rover, try to keep the obstacle on the left side of the vehicle because there is slightly more ground clearance than on the right, where the differential is located. If you have followed all these instructions carefully, you will have done everything possible to limit the damage which can occur in such situations, and you can drive home without any worries. A muddy surface requires a slightly higher speed than a dry one. Wherever possible, stay in the tracks of previous vehicles. Try to avoid steering into any slight slides in order to correct them, because the vehicle will normally stay on course, despite a certain amount of side slippage. If the steering lock is high, you must reckon with the fact that the vehicle is liable to slide on for a while in the tracks before suddenly moving sideways. You lose momentum getting back on course. The drive becomes uneven and irregular, and the danger of getting bogged down increases. Furthermore, driving this way puts excessive strain on the suspension. On the other hand, if you steer lightly through the mud at constant speed, you will discover that the only effect on the vehicle is a mud bath, easily removable by a good wash. In extreme cases, you can also reduce tire pressure This will improve the flex characteristics of the tires and hence their self-cleaning ability. Traction will be improved and the tendency to sink into the mud reduced. The general rule is that humps should be driven over at right angles and ditches crossed diagonally. This ensures the best possible coordination between axles, springs, and transmission. Here again, the rule is do everything as slowly as possible. Channels and gullies should be negotiated in such a way as to keep the vehicle level. The individual stages. Approach the hump vertically so that the wheels stay on the ground. Then turn to the right and cross the ditch diagonally. 3 wheels provide sufficient traction here. Another right-angled approach to the next hump. And then on the level again, drive slowly along a gully. There's room for a complete camera team underneath. The whole thing again together. Hump at right angles. Ditch diagonally. The second hump. And the gully. A series of humps can be crossed at right angles as long as there's no danger of the chassis making contact with the ground. And that can happen a lot quicker than one might think. Note how, with the camera in exactly the same position, this part can be negotiated at an angle without any problem. However, trying to apply the same theory on a quite different surface, such as sand, will prove to be useless. A sand dune like this, for example, cannot be conquered by driving at right angles or diagonally, and certainly not by driving slowly. In no time at all, the wheels have burrowed their way into the soft sand, and the maneuver has to be broken off. So far, we've been using the first part of the speed rule, drive as slowly as possible. But now it's time to apply the second part. Drive as fast as necessary. Then it can be done. Under normal circumstances, you will not come near this point of no return. A natural internal sense of balance will prevent you from coming too close to the turnover point, let alone from going beyond it. However, you must pay very careful attention to the road surface and avoid any parts where the vehicle could slide. Where lateral clearance is tight, it's not enough to stop the vehicle from slipping sideways. If the direction of inclination changes from one side to the other, the highest point on the vehicle can swing over a very long way. You must learn to anticipate such a situation in good time and allow for it. If the surface is slippery as well, whether frozen or soft, muddy or sandy, both factors, the risk of slipping and the increased list, have to be allowed for. A wide gap in which you could normally park without any trouble suddenly becomes very narrow indeed. At the top, there's plenty of room, but at the bottom, there's not enough space to maneuver. Incautious use of the brake is all it takes to ensure that you fail. Don't be too proud to admit such a mistake early enough to start again from the beginning, before you get stuck. A slope is especially tricky to deal with when the ground is sand. The very uneven loading of the wheels takes effect much more quickly. The vehicle begins to slip downwards, and steering corrections are all but impossible. And then you may not be able to save the situation by reversing. Not a very pleasant place to park. Always think twice before attempting to cross an area which is likely to involve extreme vehicle inclination. It's preferable to abort a maneuver rather than get stuck. Otherwise, you'll need the advice in our next chapter on winching, earlier than you might have wished. If your off-road vehicle is equipped with a winch, you can do all sorts of things. But hauling tree trunks is not likely to be one of them. So let's concentrate on using the winch for rescue work. When running it out, keep the winch cable under tension so that it doesn't get tangled. Position your vehicle as far as possible in the direction from which you wish to pull the damaged vehicle, and make sure the cable is attached to it at the right point. Steer the vehicle being rescued so that it always points straight at the winch. Keep checking that the cable is being wound up cleanly, but don't get too close. A snapped cable can cause nasty injuries. If the power is insufficient, you can use a snatch block to construct a makeshift block and tackle. This simple expedient has the effect of doubling the power of your winch. Where a lot of power is needed, secure the winch vehicle properly. And one cannot stress this point too much. Keep well away from the cable, especially when a lot of power is required. If a firm anchor point is available, you can also get yourself out of a tricky situation. Like Baron Munchausen, who claimed to be able to lift himself by his own hair, you can literally pull yourself out of trouble. If at all possible, reinforce the winching effect by using the engine, and try to find someone to keep an eye on the cable as it winds up. When you have finished, clean the cable thoroughly and wind it up carefully. Always use suitable heavy-duty gloves because hairline cracks in the steel cable can cause unpleasant hand injuries. By looking after the cable in this way, you will ensure that it is always ready to deal with a sudden emergency, like the predicament into which our camera team have managed to get themselves. With a diesel-powered Camel Trophy Land Rover, one can, in principle, drive through almost any depth of water. In principle. The essential requirement is that one can get out the other side. The best snorkel in the world, you can see it at the front near the windscreen, is not much use otherwise. And wheel-deep water poses no problem for a petrol engine model. However, you should be sure that this depth will not be exceeded. So it pays to check this as well as the nature of the ground beneath the water before proceeding. If you want to go any deeper than this, you will need to prepare your Land or Range Rover accordingly. Screwed into a threaded dummy hole in the timing chain housing, you will find a plug. Unscrew it and use the plug as a seal to keep water out of the timing chain housing. You will find a discharge plug in the tool roll. Screw this into the flywheel housing or the clutch housing to prevent the grease being washed out. and dirty water entering the housing and damaging the clutch. Finally, loosen the fan belt to avoid the extra resistance generated by a submerged fan. Now you can go in above the wheels, but no further than headlight depth. And if you adjust your speed until there is a trough behind the bow wave, the ignition system and the air filter will stay dry. Avoid crossing flowing water at right angles, but try to do so at an angle of about 45 degrees. The current will have a much smaller surface to act on. Here too you must pay attention to the nature of the ground beneath the water and adapt your speed accordingly. Mud demands a brisk speed, whereas stony ground, as in this example, should be taken more slowly. After taking your bath, don't forget to retighten the fan belt and open the plugged holes again. Above all, though, check the brakes, because wet brake linings don't always grip properly. Driving on a level surface across virgin sand looks easy enough, inviting even. But as soon as there's a slight gradient or downward slope, the problems begin. The wheels start to spin and quickly dig in. The first thing to do is to reduce tire pressure. This is a fully inflated tire. If the pressure is reduced to about 15 pounds per square inch, it spreads out perceptibly and increases the contact area, and the tire adapts much better to the ground surface. Even with reduced tire pressure, driving in sand is still tricky. Sudden movements of the steering wheel, for example, will immediately result in a loss of speed. The vehicle will stop, and then you're stuck. In this case, the steady and not too low speed that is recommended for driving in sand proves unsuccessful, as was demonstrated in the lesson on incline driving. It looks as though the blinker knew what was going to happen. When driving in sand, at all costs, try to prevent the vehicle from coming to a standstill. Have the courage to reduce the steering lock if a slip should start to develop, and work with sensitive feet and not too much throttle. Then you might make it. Just. Before attempting to drive up a particularly steep slope, estimate its length and gradient and select the appropriate gear, which will usually be second or third. Get up to speed on the level so that you can ease off the accelerator when climbing. This will help to prevent the wheels spinning. If you don't reach the top because you've picked the wrong gear or the going is slippery, don't just brake and lock the wheels. You won't always slide down as easily as this. The vehicle is out of control. It's much better to stall the engine, immediately engage reverse gear, release the clutch completely, restart the engine, and steer your way back down in a controlled manner. If you're successful on the next attempt, avoid driving over the summit too quickly. You don't know what might be waiting for you. Before driving down the other side, get out and check that the road at the bottom is clear. When you're at the top of a steep hill, the bonnet blocks your view downwards, and beyond the tip-over point, it may be too late. After making your check, always engage first gear and roll slowly down to the bottom without braking. It may even be necessary to use the accelerator to avoid slipping, but never the brake. If you need to negotiate a bend on a steep incline, simply combine the two components. You drive up as fast as necessary, arrive at the highest point as slowly as possible, change down into first gear and roll down to the bottom without braking. Don't be too proud to stop on the summit to change gear, but be careful not to let the higher of the two front wheels go up the bank or over any other obstacle. This is the only thing that could be dangerous at the highest point, because when the vehicle is at such an extreme angle, a stone is all that's necessary to shift the center of gravity enough for you to turn over. And that's a very important lesson. Bumpy and stony surfaces simply have to be taken at snail's pace. Suspension and springs are built to take it, but not if you have a heavy foot. Even at this speed, you should try either to steer clear of the larger obstacles or drive over them with the wheels, because as you know, there's not a lot of room to spare underneath the vehicle. But don't forget, do it slowly. And here too, you should take the path of least resistance in the interests of both vehicle and environment. It's no use knocking your head against a wall. Gentle, slow, and smooth driving is called for here. Driving this way will ensure that you reach the finish in one piece. And then you can think about applying for the next Camel Trophy qualifying test. Because now that you've successfully completed this course of lessons, you're well equipped, at least in terms of driving skills. Yes, you're quite right. The 10th Camel Trophy is not being held in Europe. It's returning to its birthplace, the jungles of Brazil. But snow and ice would be very suitable to test the characteristics of man and machine that are necessary in the jungle. Strength, skill, endurance, and improvisational skills. A Range Rover can also do more than other vehicles in snow and ice, but even it can't do everything. On snow and ice, physical laws also apply to a four-wheel drive vehicle. You can't take a corner any faster than with a conventional vehicle. You'll just drift out. And at full throttle on packed snow or ice, all four wheels will simply spin. When you brake, you'll slide just as helplessly on locked wheels over the ice as, well, you can see for yourself. Even a four-wheel drive is no use with locked wheels. In snow, you should take a lesson from the farmer with his bull. Give way and use sensitivity of hand and foot to make it go the way you want. For example, when driving uphill, use minimum throttle in the highest gear possible. And don't drive too fast, but at a speed that enables you to negotiate corners without skidding. Whatever you do, don't accelerate away from the corner too sharply. It doesn't take much to develop wheel spin, and then you're in trouble. Keep your foot off the brake when driving downhill. But if you can't avoid it and you start to slide, release the brake immediately and try to bring the vehicle under control by steering carefully and pumping the brake. The safest way of driving downhill in these conditions with a four-wheel drive vehicle is to do so in the lowest gear that allows you to regulate speed with the throttle without having to touch the brakes. And the same applies to taking downhill corners as when driving uphill. Because of their high center of gravity, off-road vehicles are particularly liable to slide. So let's imagine that one of the next Camel Trophies will take place in the Alps, the Rocky Mountains, or the Himalayas. There will be a great number of tricky driving problems to solve, as well as physical hardships. Icy cold instead of sweltering heat, snowstorms instead of monsoon rains. But for all the hardship, there will also be moments of great satisfaction and happiness, wonderful scenery, and unforgettable encounters. And maybe there'll be a special task involving crossing an expanse of flat snow, where a four-wheel drive vehicle will have less trouble than a conventional vehicle, but where it's very important to judge the snow depth correctly, to choose the correct route, and to use the correct speed. In short, where only the best off-road driver will be successful. And there will certainly also be situations comparable to those we now know, from water, quagmire, and jungle. Situations that cause a vehicle to get stuck. The film crew applied the basic principle of the Camel Trophy philosophy and solved the problem in the right way, by using teamwork. Perhaps this film has made you feel that you would like to take part in a Camel Trophy. So why not apply?